Have you ever noticed that the human brain treats a delayed text message like a medieval assassination attempt? You send someone, "Hey, just checking in." 10 minutes pass. No reply. And suddenly your brain transforms into a Netflix documentary narrator. They saw the message. They hate you. Your social reputation is collapsing. This one interaction will echo through history, which is fascinating because biologically speaking, you are not actually being hunted by wolves. Probably. But your brain doesn't really care. Because the human mind was not designed to make you calm. It was designed to keep you alive. And historically, those are two very different jobs. See, one of the weirdest features of human psychology is that our brains are basically ancient survival software running on modern hardware. We have smartphones, climate control, food delivery apps, and a machine that can summon a guy named Usman to your house with a cheeseburger at 2 a.m. But emotionally, your nervous system still thinks you might die in the woods. That's why worst-case thinking exists, or as psychologists call it, catastrophic thinking, which sounds dramatic because it is. The basic idea is that the brain constantly runs mental simulations of disaster in order to protect you from danger. And honestly, from an evolutionary psychology perspective, this made total sense. Imagine you're an ancient human wandering through the wilderness 40,000 years ago. You hear rustling in the bushes. Now there are two possible approaches here. Option 1, probably nothing. Option 2, that bush contains a tiger, a snake, a demon, and possibly debt collectors. The second guy survives longer. That's the important thing. Human brain evolution rewarded people who were extremely good at threat perception. Because if you underreacted to danger, you died. But if you overreacted, you just looked anxious for a few minutes. Natural selection looked at this system and basically said, yeah, let's keep that. And congratulations. Now your brain treats, my boss wants to talk tomorrow, with the same emotional survival instincts once reserved for saber-toothed predators. This is called negativity bias. Your brain automatically prioritizes negative possibilities over positive ones because danger anticipation was historically more useful than optimism. That's why one awkward interaction can ruin your entire day, while 14 positive experiences barely register. Your subconscious mind protection system is incredibly efficient at finding problems. In fact, your brain's favorite hobby is emotional threat detection. It loves it. The brain wakes up every morning like an unpaid intern whose only task is identifying imagined threats. What if everyone secretly dislikes you? What if that headache is fatal? What if you accidentally destroy your future because of one mildly awkward email? And the annoying part is that your body responds as though these scenarios are real. Because your stress response system cannot perfectly distinguish between actual danger and vividly imagined danger, that's why anxiety and overthinking feel physical. Your heart rate increases, your muscles tighten, stress hormones and anxiety chemicals start flooding the system. Your adrenaline response activates. Your nervous system response ramps up, all because your brain invented a fictional scenario with the production quality of a Christopher Nolan film. This is the fight or flight response. Except now, instead of running from predators, you're sitting in bed at 1:43 a.m., replaying a conversation from 2017. Human progress. And the really interesting part is that this process often happens automatically. Most worst-case scenario, anxiety begins subconsciously. You don't consciously decide, I would now like to ruin my evening with intrusive thoughts. Your brain just launches into defensive thinking patterns because uncertainty, anxiety, triggers ancient survival instincts. The human brain hates uncertainty, like genuinely despises it. From a psychological survival mechanisms perspective, uncertainty is terrifying because uncertainty means unpredictability. And unpredictability historically meant danger. So whenever your brain lacks information, it tries to fill the gap. Unfortunately, due to cognitive bias and emotional survival bias, the brain usually fills that gap with fear-based thinking. For example, your friend says, "We need to talk later." Objectively, this could mean literally anything. Maybe they need advice. Maybe they're venting. Maybe they found a raccoon wearing shoes. But your overthinking psychology immediately goes, "This is the end." That's uncertainty intolerance in action. Your brain would rather invent a bad answer than tolerate having no answer, which honestly explains like 70% of internet discourse. Now, occasionally, worst-case thinking is useful. Risk assessment psychology exists for a reason. Mental simulations help humans prepare for real problems. If you imagine failing an exam, you might study harder. If you imagine getting lost, you bring a map. If you imagine accidentally texting your ex, you delete their number after the 7th emotional relapse. Preparation can be healthy. The problem starts when protective brain mechanisms become overactive, because then your mind stops using catastrophic thinking as an occasional tool and starts using it as a lifestyle. Every uncertainty becomes danger. Every silence becomes rejection. Every inconvenience becomes evidence that civilization is collapsing. This creates anxiety loops. Your brain imagines danger. Your body reacts emotionally. Your subconscious fear patterns interpret the emotional reaction as proof the danger is real, which creates more fear and imagination, which creates more stress and uncertainty, which creates more chronic worrying. And eventually, your emotional brain response becomes trapped in anxious thought cycles. At this point, the survival brain versus logical brain conflict becomes obvious. Logically, you know you're probably okay. Emotionally, your brain is preparing for societal collapse because someone used a period at the end of a text message. Now, here's the important distinction. Worst-case thinking does not mean you're weak. It does not mean your brain is broken. It means your psychological defense mechanisms are functioning a little too enthusiastically. Your mind is trying to perform mental self-protection. Badly, but sincerely. And honestly, realizing this changes everything. Because once you understand that many negative thought patterns are simply subconscious mental patterns created by ancient survival instincts, you stop treating every thought like objective reality. This is where self-awareness and thoughts become important. The goal is not to eliminate fear. That would be impossible unless you become a houseplant. The goal is thought awareness. Observing thoughts instead of automatically believing them. This is why mindfulness and anxiety practices work surprisingly well. Not because mindfulness magically deletes stress, but because observing thoughts creates distance from them. You start noticing, oh, my brain is generating another disaster movie, instead of, oh no, disaster is definitely happening. That tiny shift matters enormously, because awareness versus fear changes your relationship with thinking itself. And this is basically the core of cognitive reframing. You acknowledge the possibility without treating it like certainty. This could happen becomes very different from this will happen, which sounds simple, but psychologically, that distinction is massive. It reduces emotional reaction patterns. It interrupts anxiety loops. It weakens fear conditioning. It improves emotional regulation. And most importantly, it gives your logical brain time to re-enter the chat. Another thing that helps is balanced thinking, not toxic positivity, not pretending everything is perfect. Nobody wants to become the guy who says everything happens for a reason after your house explodes. What you want is realistic thinking patterns. Your brain naturally imagines the worst. So consciously practice positive possibility thinking too. If your mind can create catastrophic scenarios, it can also create neutral or hopeful ones. For example, instead of, they haven't replied because they hate me, try, they might just be busy, which sounds painfully obvious. But to an anxious brain, this is revolutionary technology. This builds mental flexibility. And mental flexibility is one of the strongest forms of emotional resilience humans can develop. Because psychologically healthy people are not people who never experience fear. They're people who can experience fear without automatically surrendering to it. That's emotional intelligence. And weirdly enough, one of the biggest breakthroughs in understanding anxiety is realizing that thoughts are often just thoughts, not prophecies, not divine warnings, not messages from the universe. Just mental habit formation mixed with stress management, psychology, and an overactive imagination. Your brain evolved to protect you from physical danger, but modern life mostly involves psychological stress response instead. Emails, deadlines, social media, existential dread, LinkedIn. So now your ancient survival system spends all day trying to survive situations it was never designed for, which is why mental health awareness matters so much today. Because many people spend years believing their fear-based thinking is reality, when it's often just exaggerated imagined danger response patterns. And honestly, a huge percentage of the worst-case scenarios humans imagine never happen. But we still experience the emotional processing as if they did, which means we suffer twice. Once in imagination, and once in reality if the thing actually happens. Terrible business model. So the next time your brain starts catastrophizing, Pause for a second. Notice the thought. Observe the stress response. And remember, your brain is trying to protect you using a system built for surviving forests, predators, and uncertainty 10,000 years ago. It's not always accurate. It's just overprotective. And sometimes, the healthiest thing you can do is stop treating every fearful thought like an emergency broadcast from the universe. Because possibilities are not predictions. Thoughts are not facts. And your imagination, despite its impressive dedication to psychological warfare, is not always telling the truth, which is comforting until your brain starts wondering whether this entire video was secretly about you specifically. In which case, good luck with that. And hey, if you enjoyed the video or found yourself personally attacked by your own brain during at least 3 separate parts of it, do us a favor and leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It genuinely helps the channel grow and tells the algorithm. Yeah, more emotionally unstable psychology videos, please. And if you've ever caught yourself imagining the absolute worst-case scenario over something tiny, let us know in the comments. Because statistically speaking, half the comments section is probably overthinking whether to comment right now.